on Chatham-Kent's council composition and ward boundary review. We've got folks here in the audience, and I want to welcome the folks who are joining us with our online audience. We're going to be going through a whole series of topics tonight related to both the structure of council and the functionality of the current system of wards that you have in Chatham-Kent. My name is Sabine Matheson, and I'm a partner at Strategy Corp. I'm here with my colleague Hannah Tobias Murphy, who will be taking notes of the session. We've also got a couple of folks here from Chatham-Kent, the municipality of. I just want to begin, as is your custom, with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Anishinaabe Nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Odawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we, as beneficiaries of the treaty, must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Just a couple of quick facilitation reminders. It may seem funny because we're all pretty close here in the front of the room, but if you want to ask a question, if you'll please just stick up your hand and we'll get you a microphone. That's because the people online will definitely not be able to hear you if you just ask me. And so
we're just waiting for the microphone. I was out of batteries, so just hold your questions until we get a mic for you.
Yeah, and once we do get it up, you'll be sitting up here, so if you got a question, we'll be able to ask it. But don't think that we're forcing you for the microphone because of any reason other than the convenience of the folks that are home. Our goal is to create a environment where all the perspectives can be shared and respected. So, and that's all consistent with the norms of Chatham-Kent meetings. So we'll be operating under those normal rules. But the most important is that all questions and comments are welcome. For those who are online, please feel free to use the chat to share comments or ask questions. With the slides, I'm not going to read them all at you because you can read more quickly than I can speak. But what I do want to do through the content that we'll be presenting tonight is to provide you with enough information that you can understand some of the rules and obligations that we have to follow as we undertake this work. Because while there's a lot of creativity in trying to figure out how to appropriately develop processes and systems that will work for a community like this, there's also a lot of rules. So it's a highly regulated activity. So we'll speak about some of that because that'll help you understand how you can best help us through your input to the process. Just by way of introduction, as you know, the municipality of Chatham-Kent provides important services. And whether that's everything from roads to fire protection, parks and recreation, local planning, economic development, the services that Chatham-Kent delivers matter, and so that means how you govern yourself matters. Chatham-Kent is led by an elected council. It consists of a mayor and 17 councillors. As is the practice province-wide, they're elected every 4 years. The mayor is elected at large. That means every eligible voter is entitled to cast a vote. Now, what's a little different about Chatham-Kent is that you have 6 wards. You've got 2 from Ward 1, which is West Kent. You've got 3 from Ward 2, which is South Kent. You've got 2 from each of East. Oh, I've just been turned off. Hang on. You good? I think switcheroo. Yeah, very good. You've got 2. You've got. No, I'm off again. The other switcheroo. I'm trying for some reason. I don't know what's going on here.
Turn one off.
Turn one off.
Now we're good. You've got 2 from each of East Kent, North Kent, and Wallaceburg, and then you've got 6 from Ward 6, which is Chatham. The review of your council structure and ward boundaries is something that municipalities are entitled to do under the Municipal Act every now and again. This particular review, under the terms of reference that were given to us by council, is going to take a look at the size and structure of council. That is to say, the number of councillors on council and the potential role of an elected deputy mayor, how councils are elected. That could include anything from by ward, at large, or some combination of the two. It could also relate to how many councillors are elected per ward, and then ultimately the electoral ward boundaries. I just want to say, these are the terms of reference that were given. The terms of reference basically amount to take a look at everything that may be looked at under the Municipal Act. The fact that all of these questions have been put to us to evaluate doesn't indicate that any change will be coming or that no change will be coming. It's our obligation as external consultants to take a look at it with a totally fresh set of eyes, to have no particular bias on any of the individual points. And so at this stage, we've been told to take a look at all of these things, but I think it's really important to stress the fact, for example, that we're going to ask questions about whether there ought to be a deputy mayor doesn't imply that we're considering having a full-time deputy mayor. It just implies that we're obligated to take a look at it. And that will be true of all of the questions that we're asking, because what we're not allowed to do is come in with a predisposed opinion right off the start that, you know, we're not going to touch this or we're not going to touch that. But it also doesn't mean that we are going to touch something either. We're supposed to look at it independently, having regard to all the inputs that we'll have. So another key important point is we're supposed to take a look at it over a horizon covering 2 municipal elections. So the 2026 election and the 2030 election. And what's interesting about that is that means there's an element of counting the current population and forecasting the population as it will be in 4 years. And that means it's a little bit like, you know, curling. You gotta let the rock go, and then you also have to predict where it's going to be by the time it gets down to the end of the ice. So there's a certain amount of art in that. Just because somebody gets a building permit doesn't mean they build right away. But that's why that it's very important that we do take a look at it over time, or otherwise you wind up having to potentially change your ward boundaries, you know, too frequently. So in terms of the horizon we're supposed to look at is these 2 electoral periods. And as you know, the mandatory election date for all municipalities in Ontario next is October the 26th of 2026. So this process needs to be completed in time to be ready for that election. So why conduct the review? Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that the ward boundaries in Chatham-Kent haven't been changed since they were first drawn at the time of amalgamation. Communities grow, and there are certain obligations, as you'll hear more in greater detail a bit later, about trying to maintain a relative balance between the various electoral districts in order to have appropriate fairness in representation. So as communities grow, sometimes the bands of fairness that they operate in get stretched more or less. So it's all municipalities have to review things every now and again. And so the recent rate of change, and combined with all the other change that's happened over the last 25 years, makes this an appropriate time to do it. And then once the process gets triggered, it triggers the consideration of all the other questions I was just describing before. But you know, every ward boundary review and council structure review has the same goals, which is to ensure effective representation for all residents. And the review process, it's basically what you'd expect. It's a lot of listening on the front end. I want to emphasize, we are not here today to present to you possibilities for change. We're a whole step in the process earlier than that. Right now, we're just listening to how satisfied you are with what you got now. Because, you know, in life and in ward boundary reviews, if it ain't broke, don't fix it is a legitimate principle. But so one component is we're going to be listening to people through a digital survey, through sessions like this, and also we'll do our own mathematical analysis of both how things are and how they're projected to be, and just take a look at it from those various perspectives. It'll be later in the process where we'll come back with any draft recommendations that may be made, and it's at that time when there'll be a whole second round of meetings where you'll be able to comment on the draft. But for now, we're actually more at the, if we were in a restaurant, we wouldn't be at the how are the first few bites tasting phase, we would be at the may I take your order please phase. So we're a whole step ahead of that. So if you're expecting a big reveal of, we think there should be this many wards, or we think there should be this many councillors, or we think there should be boundaries here or there, that ain't tonight. But I think that's a good thing, because it's usually ready, aim, fire is much better than fire, aim, ready. So this is all about listening. This is just an invitation to stay involved. You'll see all this information on the Let's Talk Chatham-Kent website. Let's Talk Chatham-Kent.ca is the place where you can go for all of the information about this. It'll also have links that'll take you off to YouTube or to the other typical social media channels that Chatham-Kent has. Second phase will be later this fall, but we're supposed to be done by December. So it'll be quick, but we're really just getting going. Got a question?
Yeah, we're just going to switch microphones. We're having problems with the second wireless, so we're going to set up a podium microphone for you,
Okay.
and then we'll have that one for the crowd.
Do you want me to pause? Or?
Yep, they're going to come in and take care of it right now.
Okay. There will be a brief pause. Actually, do you want me to keep talking while I have this until they get here? Yeah, okay. There will not be a brief pause. So I just want to start off with reviewing council structure, the provincial rules. And so these rules, I mentioned that it's a highly regulated activity. It's all set out in the Municipal Act, what the municipality is allowed to do. So municipality may review and set the size of its council within certain rules, minimums that are set by Ontario law. So the minimum number of councillors that you can have is 5. So Chatham-Kent is well in excess of 5. So, but it's interesting. There are a few municipalities that do go as low as 5, and that would include the mayor. The head of council must always be elected by the municipality at large. We good for the switch? And I'm wondering how low I have to bend over. May I, anybody who's watching, this is not an instance of bad posture. I just want to make that clear. My mother would be shocked. I don't think I can stand up straight. Is it picking up? Is it? Okay, good. The head of council has to be elected at large. Now, there's 3 options for how councillors can be elected. It can be by ward, the way you do it now. It can be at large, which means it's everybody on council would be elected by everybody in the municipality in the same way as the mayor. You're also entitled to do it as a combination of both by ward and at large. That is an option that we need to have on the table. If we were to take a look at how other places do it, we've got a list in the package of we took 26 municipalities, 13 with the next higher populations, and 13 with the next lower populations, to just give you an idea of how similarly sized municipalities deal with the question. So when you go 13 higher and 13 lower, you get to a floor of 70,000 and 220,000 on the top end. Now, there's 444 municipalities in Ontario, so you can compare yourself to a place that only had 3,000 residents, but it wouldn't be particularly relevant. Similarly, you could compare yourself to Toronto or Mississauga or Ottawa, which are the biggest, but they wouldn't be really all that relevant because they're 20 times bigger in the case of Toronto and 10 times bigger in the case of Ottawa and Mississauga. So we've tried to compare them to other similarly sized places. And what you see is the blue represent on the chart lower tier municipalities. So those would be ones that are inside a county structure. You're a single tier municipality, which means that you don't have a county anymore. It's just a single municipality. And Chatham-Kent is there in orange. So you can see the Chatham-Kent within your size class sticks out a bit at 18 with a relatively large council. The next nearest in size is 15. And you can see there's 5 that are 13. You can see there's 6 that are 11. There's also 8 that are at 9. The other interesting thing to consider is geographic area, because Chatham-Kent is big. And, like if we were comparing you to, say, Brantford or, other places that were around 100,000. They're still not as big. And so two of the best direct comparators are Sudbury, which has a rather large area, and also Kawartha Lakes. And those are both single tier. And I can't see the notes here. Hannah, I got you to do this the other day. Can you just, and actually, could we just grab the mic for Hannah for just a second? Just if you can just remind me and so I can or just tell the folks what Sudbury has and what Kawartha Lakes has.
So for Kawartha Lakes, they have 9 counselors, and then for Greater Sudbury, they have 13 counselors.
And the geographic area?
Yeah, so population is 75,000 for Kawartha Lakes, and then for Sudbury, their population is 161,000.
And the area is all sort of.
The area,
3,000 square kilometers.
thank you. So 3,000 square kilometers for Kawartha Lakes and
Greater Sudbury is 3,200 square kilometers.
3,200 square kilometers.
Looked at that today.
Yeah, so you get into this sort of situation where you could use those as a model, and you'd still sort of find that you've got a high degree of representation in Chatham-Kent. So one of the first questions we have, and I'll get our friend with the microphone to stay fairly close for this, is do you have any initial thoughts on your current size of council? Like, is 18 about right? Does it feel like it's too much, or does it feel like it's too little? Any comments for us on that?
I definitely have a comment on that. I don't want to take too much time. I actually sat on the governance task force that was done in 2011. It was not adopted. And one thing that I find was really significant was that we did 9 public consultation meetings, and the urban centers all wanted smaller councils. I say all, but generally wanted smaller council, but the rural areas did not want smaller representation. So one thing I really want to emphasize for you and how I feel is I get frustrated with the comparison of the municipality to other city structures that are all urban. I like that you look at Kawartha Lakes and Greater Sudbury that are single tier, because if you look at it another way, I'm sorry if I'm taking too much time, I'm going to say this eventually tonight, but so I might as well do it now. Oxford County, to me, is a good comparison. It's the same size, it's rural, it's Southern Ontario. It's a double tier municipality. It has townships, and then it has a county council. Well, county council only has 10 councillors, and they have, I believe, 130,000 they're at right now. So very comparable to the size of Chatham-Kent. However, each township has 5 to 7 councillors. So together, they have 45 municipal representatives representing their community. So I feel frustrated when we talk about comparing to urban centers that are not anything like Chatham-Kent. I like the idea of looking at counties. Again, I know we're single tier, but our geography hasn't changed. We're still a county when you look at the geography. So I like the idea of let's look at what other counties around us are doing. And one other thing I just want to say is when they did this, when they amalgamated us, they decided this was a failed experiment. We all know this, right? Not just saying that Chatham-Kent, I'm not saying we can't work with what we have, but they quit doing it for a reason. They started instead amalgamating into townships within a county. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose focus on, maybe we could do that with our wards. Think of our wards more like maybe little townships within our county. So that's just my 15 cents, I guess.
Thank you. Other comments on size? I should just say before you start, there's lots of different ways to reach us with your comments. So it's great if you want to speak up tonight. If you don't, the survey that we mentioned, that's a great way to communicate with us too. So, there's whatever works for you, that's great for us in terms of how you want to communicate. But please, go ahead.
I'm Leon, and I filled out the survey last night.
Thank
I just walked in a few minutes late, but first off, I definitely do not want full-time counselors. I don't know if that's been spoken about, but today the Herald, the Thamesville Herald, wrote an article, and the question was asked, were you involved in this? And everybody says no, no, no. Well, they were caught and they lied. going forward, if they're full-time counselors, now it's a full-time job, it's gonna pay, they're gonna say, we're not gonna raise, we're not gonna get raises, we're not gonna have pensions. My fear as a full-time counselor, they're not gonna vote with their heart anymore, it's gonna be with their wallet. And that's one of my fears. I was a counselor for 8 years here. I hired somebody to help me farm so I could do my counselor work. So I actually was a net loss being a counselor, so I've been there and I know. But being a full-time counselor scares the jeeves out of me. You look at the federal, the way it's going now, they're just dragging out this federal system for until January 25th, so they get a pension. I think we're not there. I just don't trust council. People make recommendations to councilors, and if it sounds good, well, councilors will vote for it. Well, hey, it was recommended, yeah, we'll vote for it. Like, what are we supposed to do? So that's one thing. Secondly, yeah.
Actually, if I could get you to stay on the question of what are your thoughts on the current size of council?
Yeah.
Because there's a whole process we're gonna go through.
Oh, okay, current size, so, yeah, so the structure of the community, you don't wanna, or how council's formed?
Well, how many?
Status quo.
Okay.
And
That's good.
when I was on council, it was brought up then, and if it would have passed, I might have made an amendment, and my amendment would have been similar to this. How about the manufacturers or those that generate the wealth in the community have a say at the table? So agriculture, manufacturing, industry, homeowners association, maybe they should have a vote, a say. They're paying the taxes. Our composition right now, I don't know how many of them have life skills. They're all, and I say life skills not in a negative way, but they're.
I'll just cut you off there because we can't go there because the municipal act defines the category of voter. So that's not something we can recommend on anyway, but just in the interest of we've only got 2 hours to make it through.
Yeah.
We can't change who gets to vote for who through this, so.
So status quo.
Okay, on size, good. Any other comments on size of council? And I don't mean to hurry you along, but I kind of got to hurry you along. But I'm happy to hear anything over the course of the evening.
Thank you. I'm Stan Bryan. I'm from Ridgetown. I was a counselor in Howard Township decades and decades ago. I remember when amalgamation came in, and I remember some of the staff said to me, we like this a lot better because we only have to report to one entity. Like before, we had all the villages and all the staff, they had all the counselors in the villages and the county and everything else. And somebody was always looking over their shoulder and telling them what to do. So they really liked the amalgamation a lot better because it was a structure that they reported to. So for us out in the boonies out there, I find we don't really have representation because our 2 counselors that we had in our ward, they always voted against everything. They voted against the budget. They voted against a lot of things the city of Chatham wanted to do. And us sitting out there really had nowhere to go. And staff weren't responsive to our concerns because they weren't reporting to us anymore, to the community leaders. They're reporting to the mayor and council. So we had less representation. But I do think that the 17-person is too large a group for effective decision making, and that kind of went away against what I just said. But I hear what you said, Leon. But that's a big group to work through at every meeting, and an unworkable size group. So I just think that's too big a group to have a workable group.
Okay, thanks. Other comments on size? Okay, look, I'm going to plow ahead, but go ahead. Yep, we got one more here.
I think the status quo is where we need to be because everybody is elected. And if you cut it back much more, then we lose even more rural representation. And we have major problems with representation now. So, and if you just take the numbers here, if I can speak on that right now.
Well, actually, we're going to get into the numbers and they'll be in front of you. So if, sorry, do you mean the number of councillors or do you mean the numbers by the wards?
By word.
No, just hang on for that because
We'll go there. Fine.
yeah, but we'll get there, don't we? Okay, any more on the number of council? So you see, like, one of the secrets of the whole process is the reason why you set the number of councillors first is because, you know, you can have fun with markers and maps and then calculators and draw it any way you want. But it's a lot easier to figure out how you're drawing it if you know how many boards you're drawing or how many representatives you want to have. So that's why that's the first question in the process. The second question is, how should they be elected? And of the same 26 municipalities that I was comparing to before, 20 of them use a ward system. So that's by far the most common. 2 use an at-large system, and some use a combination of wards and at-large systems. And typically where they do that, what it means is that there's one councillor or position that's a deputy mayor position. And so sometimes that's elected municipal-wide. You know, there's different advantages and disadvantages to having an elected deputy mayor. There's also different advantages and disadvantages to the ward system. Some of them are set out there, but like, frankly, it'd be a very long slide if we ran everything there that you could possibly think of. Does anybody have any views on, like, is anybody dissatisfied with a ward-based system and would prefer to go to at-large? Or does anybody have any comments about why at-large would be a bad idea? Again, this is something we have to ask.
Maybe you can explain the terms.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ward means you divide it up the way you have it. At-large means what we described before, the same way you elect the mayor, which is everybody gets a vote. And ward and a hybrid is, as I just said, you probably have one council member who's elected by everybody, in addition to the mayor, and then the others would be by ward. Although, you know, you could have other hybrid models if you wanted to.
I think it's important to stick with electing within the wards because, once again, talking about representation, it's very important for the people making decisions to have a vested interest in the consequences of those decisions. So if they live in the area, they're more likely, plus people have more access to them, I think. That's my opinion.
If you were doing at large,
Hang on just one second.
if you were doing at large, anybody could run from any place and you could have them all from the same place.
That's a downside, yeah. You know, it also leaps off the page that Chatham-Kent is very large. It's a long drive to campaign everywhere. Any other thoughts on the at-large or by word? You're going to give them a workout today because we're scattered all over the room. Oh, Lord.
I like the idea of a combined system, because then we would have at-large councillors that would be known by the communities around the area. And it would be a good training ground for people that wanted to run for mayor, or maybe even a higher level of government, to really get to know the area well and get better representation.
So you put your finger on what people often point to. It becomes like almost like a succession plan. You start to develop people who have that breadth, but you know, there's pros and cons. So, other thoughts on this? So let's assume for a second that we continue by ward. The next interesting question is how many councillors should be elected per ward. You've got a couple of different approaches. One is you can just divide it up so that you have as many wards as you have councillor seats that you want to have. So right now you've only got Chatham-Kent divided into 6. You could redivide it if you wanted to keep 18 councillors, you could divide it into 18 wards. You can keep the what you might call imbalanced representation, where one ward might have 6 and one ward might have 2, but just adjust it so that it better hits the population norms. You can have any kind of mix within, but I guess the main point of this question is, you know, the Chatham ward has got 6 councillors, some of the other wards have got 2. Is that okay? How's that work? Do you like it that way? Because there's all sorts of things we could do to fix it if you didn't like it. And if you don't like it the way it is, then we don't have to change it. But do you have any thoughts on that model that you have now?
So yeah, because we've got such a large geographic area, we've got a lot of areas with less representation and less concentration. I guess I would question whether you have representation by population or representation by economic contribution.
So you're not allowed to do economic contribution.
Okay, so that answers that question.
It's
Valid idea, but can't do it. Okay. The problem we have in Chatham-Kent right now is we have a fairly large rural-urban divide. And if you're going to tear this thing up, we need to try and remedy that. So the only way to remedy that is to not have a disproportionately higher number of urban representatives than you do rural in any one area.
Now, I should say, there's the distribution, we'll get into this in the principles of effective representation. There are ways to consider, like it's not a strictly mathematical exercise, but it begins as a mathematical exercise. And then there's other factors that we're allowed to consider. It's not permissible under the Municipal Act to have voting classes weighted by economic contribution. That's not a tool, that's not a lever that we're allowed to pull. But as you'll see in a minute, we do get to take into account things that have more to do with geography or land use, whether it's agricultural or rural versus urban. So we do get to take that into account. So it's not totally blind to the kinds of considerations you're describing, but it can't be expressed through straight up economic contribution. Yep. How about you?
So I just want to follow up with what Jay just asked. We'll make it non-economical. However, all the industries we have the housing, homeowners association, agriculture, industry, manufacturing, they should have a voice. Right now, again, on our council, the composition, again, life skills, most of them are employed, never had to make the big decision, unemployment, budgets, the big decisions. Now, okay, I'm eliminating the money part, but, can we get industry, the drivers of our community, get them involved on our council? Like I was there, and again, I told you, there was a loss for me on the farm. Well, not a loss, but doing my job, it cost me money.
It's public service.
Okay, so going back to full-time counselors, well then, that eliminates that, but now the people working might not be able to get involved in politics because the pay scale might be a little bit lower than what they're doing on their business. So again, what I just said, getting manufacturing, agriculture involved, it might be a tough sell in that industry to find a representative, but again, that's non-money, but maybe getting them somehow to have a voice on the council.
So, it's interesting, what you're talking about, I think, is kind of the way they structured things in Austria once upon a time. But they don't do that here. But it's not crazy to suggest it. I think I remember from my political science degree that the Austrian model kind of brought together some of that different representation you're talking about. So, but regrettably, it's not something we could consider because the Municipal Act is pretty prescriptive on it. Any other thoughts on councillors per ward?
I think that depends on the size of the ward geographically, because I know I live in East Kent right now, and to have, if you only had one councillor for that incredibly large ward, I don't think that they can adequately represent the ward that way. So maybe, I know at one time, and I believe our task force did look at 9, have you looked at that document?
Yeah.
So there's flaws, there's pros and cons to it, I'm sure that you found. But they did divide up, I believe we divided Chatham up to have some urban, some rural, and then we ended up with 9 wards. Is that correct? I wish I had a copy of it. I don't have a copy of it. But what I'm getting at is if they're smaller wards and they have a nice mix of urban, rural, you might be able to get away with one per ward. One other thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is that in Sudbury, I'm not sure of Quarter Lakes, Sudbury is also a single tier, as you mentioned. They have something called community action networks. So they have committees of council that work in an area, but they're supported with a liaison from staff. They have a staff liaison, they have some money from council, they can use municipal things. So it's almost like a, way to kind of get around, have a community representative that will support their councillors. So just going back to the size of council, as I mentioned, we didn't want to lose representation. And when we did this exercise, people didn't want to lose representation, but they did, like you said, understood that 18 on council is cumbersome. It's a lot of people to make decisions. So maybe there's a workaround where you have these little committees where you engage the community and you let them have it. And that's where you can also get your industry involved. You have people on there that are really care about the communities and can support that council.
City of Toronto does that too with the community council structure.
Right.
First of all, I want to say I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not representing any other group here. This is just my own idea, and I'm sure it's flawed, and you'll pick it apart, and that's fine. You might not like it at all. But my idea is take municipality Chatham-Kent. You make 2 wards, and you make the dividing line the Thames River. The Thames River splits the city of Chatham in half. So you'd have North Kent, South Kent, and I don't know the population. You could adjust your number of councillors according to how many people live in each one. I'm not sure what that would be, but I like it because it splits Chatham in half. And I know that we often feel unrepresented out in the boonies, but we do turn out to vote. And turnout in municipal elections is pretty poor. Like it runs around 30%, which is really pitiful. But I'm suggesting that the people who really have an interest in this thing turn out 90% in areas where it matters, because we deal with the municipality all the time in farming. So, but now, probably my idea is flawed. I hope you wouldn't end up with 7 to 9 people in the city of Chatham. I hope it wouldn't end up that way, but it would force, to me, in my mind, it would force those Chatham people to go out into Blenheim and Tilbury and campaign, because they'd be representing those people too. And I want to say one more thing about deputy mayor. I don't like that idea. Right now, what we have is when the mayor is away, they take turns acting mayor every month. I like that. It gives the other councillors a chance to have a larger role when it's their turn for the month or whatever, when the mayor is away on holidays or another meeting outside the municipality. So I like that, and I'm not in favor of a deputy mayor. So those are just some of my ideas. Maybe they're no good, but that's my idea. Thanks for your time and thanks for listening.
Actually, I really appreciate them. I'll just get other people to hold on commenting on possible word slicing, because we're going to get to that in a minute. I just wanted to take you through a little bit of background on it before we get there, but we got it. And keep those ideas coming, because this is exactly what we're looking for. Because the one thing I guarantee you is any idea that somebody floats with us, we'll evaluate on the numbers and the math and see how it works, and then run it through the test. So that is exactly the kind of concept we're looking for. You had a question at the back, did you? Comment?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I apologize, I came in later.
No, it's all good.
Well, will you be showing us representation by population currently?
Stay with
And
the
then the
door.
other thing is, have you already talked about, going to the provincial government for two-tiered rather than the one-tiered?
So we won't be talking about that, because this is a ward boundary review, not a sort of a governance review in the sense of redo the whole Chatham-Kent thing. But yeah, we're just coming up on the population stuff. We just wanted to start with the structure first, and then we'll get to the ward distribution stuff and the math of it. Other comments on?
And so even the structure that we currently have, when that was put in place and divided up, that was one of the things that was really stated and pushed hard. It'll never get to a point where it's all urban people that's on council. But guess where we are.
Other comments on? Okay, let me plow ahead here. I don't want to stare you, but we do have 41 slides and we're only on 16. So I think we've heard a bit about the deputy mayor one. It kind of comes up both as, well, why would you have at large? But if anybody has any other comments on the deputy mayor concept, we'll take them, otherwise we can move ahead. Okay. I catch that as one thumbs down, but I'm just curious. Just a show of hands isn't a bad idea. Anybody like the deputy mayor idea? And anybody don't like it? Okay.
Just a comment on what I see, and I could be wrong. Mr. McGregor might be able to correct me, but it looks like that the vice chair gets to step in for the odd meeting here, but I don't know if the vice chair gets strong mayoral powers, which our community has, and I don't know if they really get a governing role other than running one or two meetings. I just have no idea the answer to that.
Well, I can help a bit. If you had a formal deputy mayor position, then like you've got the rotating one, as was previously said. So that certainly doesn't detract any of the special powers. But in places that have a deputy mayor, it doesn't detract the special powers either. The only way it would, there's actually a section in the Municipal Act, and it escapes me right now as to what it says, but they actually did account for what happened if a mayor had to go on leave because of illness or something, or if they resigned. But that's the only way it would be triggered. There's only one strong mayor in any municipality at the same time. There's a question right at the back, but just hang on to the microphone. You wouldn't have heard, for the folks that are online, we got to use the microphones or otherwise they can't hear you.
What do other municipalities do with the mayor? Do they have deputies, or do they have just the rotating one?
Most of them have the rotating.
Okay.
Where it's more common in smaller places. You know, the biggest single challenge with, you know, a place of size is, you know, getting people to run for municipal wide to still only basically have a council seat. And so it's a big undertaking to run at the best of times in a municipality of this size. It's challenging. All right, I will just move on then with, so this is just a bit of an introduction to the concept of effective representation. The Supreme Court of Canada is the source of our best guidance on what effective representation means. And this is the test that we have to use as your consultants working on this. And there was a case where they first elaborated on this, and all the other cases that have been heard by the Ontario Municipal Board and its successor entities have basically either followed this test or elaborated on it in specific cases. So this is basically your introduction to electoral law in 5 minutes or less. The 5 things that we've got to consider are equality of representation by population today. And there's going to be a further slide on each of these. The future growth projected forward. And as we said, under the terms of reference, we're supposed to look 2 elections forward. So we're supposed to look at how equal it is today. We're supposed to look at how equal it will be by 2030, which is the next election. Then there's 3 other things, and this gets at the point that a couple of you have made about economic representation. It doesn't deal with saying, okay, well, we'll have votes being cast by particular sectors of the economy, but what it does say is that we can look at geographic and topographical features within the municipality, rivers, highways, other sort of physical things that you can touch. But we can also look at community or diversity of interests. I'll explain what they mean by that. We can also look at patterns of communication and accessibility. In other words, you know how like the traffic guys will do traffic counts and they'll know that the people in Wallaceburg tend to move in this direction or that direction, or the people in Wheatley tend to, you know, move in that direction or such. And so they try to find areas that are like natural, you know, like a watershed, but like a commuter shed. And sometimes a lot of that will have to do with where the schools are, or it might have to do with where the regional service centers are, where people go and do their shopping and that kind of thing. So take you through each one of them in turn. The equality of representation point. These all 5 of the principles are equal, but some are more equal than others, and probably the weightiest principle is it is a key democratic principle that votes should be more or less of equal weight. Now, we don't go so far in our society as to say every vote has to be exactly equal, because frankly, we'd have to have an electric scoreboard on each ward as people moved in and moved out. You'd never get it to the point where it's perfect. So they anticipate that there's always going to be some variation, whether you want there to be or not. So then it's a really nice question, well, okay, how much is enough? Or more to the point, how much is too much? And the answer to that is basically plus or minus 25% from the average. So we say all votes should be equal, but we don't really mean that. What we mean under the court is all votes are equal plus or minus 25%. And where the plus or minus 25% is pretty significant is you could conceivably be plus 24, which would be an overrepresentation, and you could be minus 24 and be an underrepresentation, and the spread between the two would be 48, and that would be technically within the realm of tolerance. So there is a fair bit of flexibility, and that explains why you can have some wards that are bigger than others. That's the authority for it. So I said that the second principle was future population growth. This is just the thing that basically says, yeah, you better think about not just how it is today, but where it's going to be. Because if it's going to be a lot worse in a couple of years, then you should think about changing it now. Because if it's broken now and it's going to be really broken later, then that would be a reason to fix it. If it's going to be okay now and it's still going to be okay later, that would be a reason to say maybe we don't have to fix it. But where you really look is if you have some that are under and some that are over, so that the net spread is getting wide, that gets pretty concerning. So that's it. Like if this were a dashboard on your car, it'd be flashing red if you were way out of whack now and you were going to be more out of whack later. So then the third, these are the ones that move away from the math, like I said. There's geographic and topographical features, things like rivers and lakes or the escarpment, or things that are human-made, like the 401's obvious in your case. There's sometimes very practical ways to come up with a boundary that people can understand, because the court likes boundaries that are easy for people to understand. The court doesn't love it when one side of the street is in one ward and another side of the street's in the other. You've got some interesting situations that have come about in Chatham-Kent where there was no other side of the street when the ward boundary was made, and now there is. And so there's probably no scenario where we don't have to do at least some tweaks, because we'd want to fix at least things like that, get people in the same street in the same place. There's community or diversity of interests, and this is an interesting one because it can deal with history. So, would you carve Wallaceburg in half? Probably not. Although I've been told that maybe we already do, because Wallaceburg has grown since it was first drawn. So maybe we'd have to change it to keep Wallaceburg from being carved in half, if you will. Because sometimes it doesn't happen because you set out to do it. Sometimes it happens because it fit neatly inside the boundary before, and now it's kind of strong. But this is also where you can consider diversity of interest. And where it gets really interesting is, we did one a couple of years ago in Grimsby. And I don't know if you know Grimsby, but if you understand Grimsby, you understand Grimsby pretty well if you understand that all the people live by the lake and all the farms are up in the escarpment. And so if you draw the lines from the escarpment to the lake, then what you get is a bunch of wards where there aren't enough rural people in any of them to elect anybody, and everything would be elected by the people down by the lake who don't have farming in their life. Another way to do it is you draw the wards so that everything above the escarpment is in one ward, and then everything below is, you can cut them however you like to get the numbers right. That gives you one really strong rural representative. The problem is if you got 8 on council, do you feel comfortable only having one really strong rural representative? So, the problems that you have in Chatham-Kent are the problems that everybody has, where you've got mixed, dense urban communities and rural communities. This principle number 4 is the kind of the get out of jail free card that says we can tweak it a little bit, within the mathematics, having due regard to the importance of having effective representation for people. And, you know, the courts recognize that. And then this other one is the means of communication and accessibility. And that's the one that just says the best boards are the ones that reflect how people really live. So if everybody down one end interacts in a particular way, try not to slice it so that people who still interact in that way accidentally get stuck in the other word. And that's a really good one for saying, you know what, there's now people living outside the old boundary of one of the communities. Got to adjust it to bring them in, because actually they relate with what's in, even though they're just on the edge and out. But where that gets difficult is it can start to ruin your numbers again. Because if you bring too many people in, then maybe you don't have enough to maintain the mathematical balance. And then the other really interesting thing is the courts, they look at it the way you might and say, yeah, look, we won't tell you which one of these is the most important, just kind of evaluate them all and do your best. So the court has kind of said, whatever you do, don't feel like you're wearing handcuffs, that you have to follow one rule over all the others, but you can't ignore any of the rules. So it really is an exercise in structured judgment. It's not wide open, but so that's why they say that it's a balance of factors. And I like the quote, ward design is not just a purely mathematical exercise. So I think what I'll do is I'll hold these questions because I feel like they'll be more fun to consider once we've talked about the math. So let me just answer your question a few minutes ago. How is the math right now? And I hope you can read that. I've got a slide on each file. You see, it should have sat at the front like we told you to. But feel free to move up if you like. So basically, these numbers are going to change. And let me tell you why. We do not have a giant electronic scoreboard that keeps score of everybody as they move into Chatham-Kent. So it's actually a bit more of a task than you might think to figure out what the actual population is today. But the best number that we have as of today is 107,770, but that I would expect before we're done that we'll have a bit more data out of the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation that's going to change these numbers a little bit. And as you'll see, we don't have the forecasts in yet. So the next time you hear from us, we're going to have the forecasts for 2030 as well. But we're still working on those, and it's really cool because today in 2024, you can actually do this exercise on like on a big geo information system of actually counting all the different properties and all the different houses, and like it's amazing what you can do today. And you can run different models that try to divide them more fairly. But so you've got 17 councillors and you've got 107,000 people. So based on the distribution of councillors by ward, you can see that 42% of the population is in Chatham. And as you can see, it's between 10 and 15% that's in each of the other wards. So then in the first of the orange columns, it divides it population per councillor by ward. And as you can see, it ranges from 5 to 7% with a certain amount of variation among them. And so like Chatham, you know, it has 42%, but it's got 6 councillors. So if you do the math, that's 7,500, give or take. So it's about 7% of the population per councillor within that ward. So when you look at how out of, the technical term I was using earlier, how out of whack it is, you can see that Chatham is plus 24% over in terms of number of people per ward. That means it's underrepresented. If you have fewer people, then that means you're overrepresented. And so it would lead you to conclude, if you looked at this, that you're probably a little bit concerned about Chatham, the Chatham wards being where they are at plus 24. And with the current growth pattern in Chatham, I would not be surprised if we come back and say by 2030 it'll be over that. It'll be greater than a plus 25. Now, one of the good pieces of news is, I kind of hinted before, I'd be really nervous if there were a lot of minus 25s. that made that spread between -25s and +25s almost 48 points, right? So the spread on the over-under isn't quite as bad as you might think. And anybody who just came in, I should just confirm to you, no, we're not talking about NFL picks. We're on the over-under. We're actually talking about word boundary design. But that's the way it looks right now. So what it would sort of suggest is that you'd want to be adjusting things a little bit in Chatham's regard. And if you think about it, 42% of the population is Chatham, and it's only got 6 of 17. So you'd say it makes sense that it's a little bit underrepresented. And when you run that math through by the boards, it's about 24%. So that's where it sits. And as I say, the next time you see us, we'll have a chart that projects this out to the next election period as well. In fact, we'll probably say, here's what it'll be today, here's what it'll be in 2026, because there's enough change that will show the 2026 reality. And then we'll show 2030 as well. So there'll probably be 3 columns. And we've got a question. We've got a question.
Yes, we've got one from Janine online. She has asked, are there any plans to establish 15-minute cities?
That's got nothing to do with this. That's a land use planning concept. So thanks for the question. And we have a question at the front too.
Thank you. I'm wondering, has any consideration been given to the urban area outside of Ward 6 and outside of Wallaceburg and incorporating it because of its common features with those 2 wards, and then how that will affect the percentages?
So absolutely. That's one of the things we got to take a look at. And so what I'll do is I can use this slide. You can see on Ward 6, and like if you look, that's what you would call urban area that is not currently in Ward 6. So like there's a real good example of what you're talking about. In Wallaceburg, there would be similar examples. And so one of the things we've got to look at from the point of view of effective representation is twofold. One is if you have too much of population that is de facto Chatham population in what's meant to be a rural ward, then it can lose its rural flavor in exactly the same way I was describing in the Grimsby example, when you have a high density of people in a particular area, and it winds up negating what was intended to be more rural representation. So we'll have to look at that, and we'll look at that in all of these areas, because one of the biggest things that's changed is the urban boundary of these core hamlets and municipalities that are, or towns that you're describing. So that's a great question. Question there?
Yes. Will you have information that breaks down the population further, like especially Chatham? Stan mentioned using the river as a boundary. Would you know how much population is north and south of the river, for example?
Yeah, we'll break it down into fairly small units and put them back together again in little pieces to try and, like when, if the insight into how you actually do this is you geocode different populations to different areas, and then you try and put them together in ways that make sense. And make sense ranges in everything from getting the right numbers and putting them together in ways that respect the math, to then trying to respect also the community representation. So yeah, it's actually really, I'll use another technical term, it's really cool what you can do. So we'll be doing that. And there's a question here. And then when you're done, there's one at the back. We'll do the word.
Sabine, could I get you to go back to the numbers?
Yeah.
When I look at what generally happens, we see an alignment of Wallaceburg with 2 councillors in Chatham with 6. And it's not an absolute thing, but if you take that and look at the numbers here, and you look at 14% over and then 24% under, and you subtract the 14 from the 24, you end up with a difference of 10% instead of 24 or 14.
So that's actually a really important perspective. Like that's one of the reasons why, the existing ward allocations need to be looked at, not just mathematically, but also having regard to the third principle about geography and the fourth principle about other commonalities of interest. So that's, like, honestly, that's exactly the sort of perspective and insight that can really help get to the heart of what we're trying to do. So thanks for that.
So back to my original idea, and I don't imagine that the people in Chatham would like it very much. I don't know what they would think of it, but I want what's best for the whole municipality as a whole. I think that if good things happen in one part of the municipality, that's good for the entire municipality. It's not that big that we can't commute to whatever the opportunities are. But what I like about my proposal is it splits Chatham in half, and it forces the candidates to go out into the Tilburys and the Wellsburgs and the Ridgetown and Blenheims to get votes. And if we ended up, heaven forbid, if we ended up with everybody from Chatham, but the only way that would happen is if they got votes from the hinterlands, put them all in. Think about it. I thought about it a lot. Maybe it's a crazy idea, but it would split the city in half, and it would force us to think more of being on Chatham-Kent as a whole rather than the tribalism of Highgate and Wheatley, and we have to get away from that, I think. So
there's one at the back, and then we'll go.
I think false alarm on this one.
Oh, okay.
Instruction is sent along.
My apologies. So, perfect.
I wanted to comment a little bit about what Stan just said and also about what you talked with me about at the end of the 22nd meeting. The fear I would have there, even though you might separate into 2 wards, is your population is still concentrated in Chatham. So you could easily have, if you did that, you could easily have all of the representatives, I think you mentioned this to me, from Chatham, depending on how the largest percentage of the population voted. That would be my fear of that type of idea.
My fear right now is if you have population of Chatham, they ought to understand the rural communities. I know certain people who think we should not spray, or we should not do this or do that. In the rural community, we have to do our business properly. In the towns, they do their business properly. And if we just go by population, I think that it could be a big headache for these smaller areas, the farmers especially.
Yeah, just to add to that, we're talking about numbers of people based on population, so there's a higher density in Ward 6 and in Wellsburg. It's not really fair though when you look at the workload, if a councillor in Ward 4, let's say, has an issue to deal with, it's a much greater responsibility and a greater geographic area to deal with, as opposed to the relative size of Ward 6. And you've got 6 councillors in a drawing. In Ward 4, we've got 2 councillors to draw. So the responsibilities could be conceived as greater.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because workload of the council is something else that we take a look at through this. And so we've interviewed or are in the process of interviewing all the current members of council in regard to workload pressure issues. And that is quite relevant. And so, thank you.
Just expanding on that point, that other part of the geography too is the communities of interest. For instance, again, East Kent has, 4, Highgate's not represented, but basically 4 kind of urban centers that have their own little, activities going on, and those councillors are expected to show up at all those things, and it's really tough in that regard. But also, of course, you've got the drainage issues and all those other things that go with farms. But I just wanted to also mention that we had talked about in the past, not just doing the north-south line, but also dividing along Highway 40, but the math didn't work out. I don't think the math worked out. And then another thing that we looked at was dividing Chatham into 3 wards, which would have 2 councillors each, rather than 6 at-large councillors, so that it would be you know, more consistent with maybe more of, well, South Kent has 3, but I mean, that's just something to consider too.
What do people think about that? Because that's not the first time we've heard that idea. What do you think? Would it be on the right track or the wrong track if we were to model dividing Chatham in some way? Would it matter? Is it a couple of
Probably set up lines and boundaries. So there are 6 at large in Chatham. One might be doing all the work and the other 5 are not doing anything, but if you have boundaries, lines, you know, not in stone, but some people don't like the certain councillor, so they will call another one. But yeah, it would delineate lines and, you know, and give them, you know, a framework to work from.
That's it.
Go ahead.
I prefer to have all 6 in because there are so many issues that include the entire ward that need the attention of the councillors, and it'll be carried better than if they're worried about more local things like, say, streetlights, than something larger like a drain network.
If I can just ask another question and get your views on this, because it builds on this. Some people say, and I'm not expressing an opinion one way or the other on this, I just like to get the conversation going about it. Some people say that it's not fair that folks in Chatham have got 6 different potential champions who can pick up a cause for them, and that it creates a condition where they're chasing each other trying to find causes. Other people say more along the lines of, no, actually, it's really good because instead of them having turf, it gets them to think about things holistically within, for one city of Chatham. And I just wondered, like, what do you think about that? Now, you're welcome to comment on other stuff that you want to think about, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that because that's something we've heard.
That's an interesting point. I think though, if you took and divided Chatham into 3 wards, and you still had 6 councillors, just say, if you use the present structure, you're still gonna have those people aligned with the city of Chatham, even if, like, all of the councillors, I guess the point I really wanna make, all of the councillors of the 18, including the mayor, should be, they do vote on every issue, regardless of whether it's in Chatham or whether it's in Highgate or Bothwell or Wheatley. They all vote on every issue, so the trick is trying to get them to look at the community as a whole, no matter where they're elected from. And if you separate it even more into more wards, and they think they're supposed to be representing only their ward, but they vote on every issue, there becomes a problem.
No? Okay. Got a couple over here on the.
Yeah, so to me, what he just stated is exactly what we have now. You know, everything is central around the urban centers. I don't know if this is the time to say it or not, but agriculture is the biggest driver in Chatham-Kent. And if we have no say and things start going against us, we can't compete on the world market. And, you know, and we're kind of seeing a lot of that now, not just Chatham-Kent, but it's across the whole province. And the housing issue and stuff, the sprawl is immense. And this has to be contained. And somewhere along the line, we got to start working with council to build, you know, 40, 50-story buildings. And I think that is something that needs to happen here in Chatham too. So now you kind of sort of align with, we don't want to be any more than 4 stories high. I'm not saying there isn't any, but that's kind of where it is because the neighbor doesn't like it. We got to get past some of that stuff and we got to start infilling. And we just don't have that say in the rural, how this has to work. So we're trying to protect the general public with food supply, and it's being taken away at the same time.
Any other thoughts on my 6 versus 2 or 3 of 2 in Chatham question? really appreciate you answering that, because we're really trying to hear what people.
I guess on that one, the easiest way to sum it up is I wouldn't see any efficiency in it. So that would, my thought.
So I got another question for you, which is, superficially at least, 2 of the wards look more urban and 4 of them look more rural. And yet I meet a lot of people in blue shirts who really emphasize that they don't feel adequate or effective representation. And I just wonder if you could explain why you think that is, just so I can understand. Is it that even the wards that appear to be more rural, the dominant electoral base is, say, in the suburbs of Chatham or the suburbs of the other places, and so that you feel like that's where the majority of the electoral power is, and that the truly rural areas have a really low effective population electorally? Is that one potential answer would be?
I think effectively you hit the nail on the head with that comment. If you took a look at some of our wards, they've been elected, dominated, like you take Ward 1, whether it be a combination of Tilbury residents and Wheatley residents. And it doesn't matter whether you look at the smaller town of Wheatley or the larger town of Tilbury. It's not a rural vote, and that doesn't always happen. In the last council term, we had more of a rural representative and more of an urban one in that ward. Right now, we have 2 that are more urban. Not 100%, but there's a tendency there. And some of our wards are more, our councillors are more based on the rural, and they think that way. So it can happen in any of the 4 rural wards where the issues of the particular town can override the issues outside the town in any individual councillor mind. So it depends on who you find for candidates and how they fare in the election. Sorry, it was long-winded.
I guess just to build on that, we have a municipality, as we had pointed out, where agriculture is the greatest economic driver, yet we do not and have not for the last two sessions had anyone sitting on council who derives their primary income from farming or has a solid background in agriculture. So without that knowledge, without that background, and without that drive to understand that industry, we're already behind.
One here.
I have a problem with the fact that a person can run in council and not belong to that ward. I think your councillors should come out of the ward they live in.
I don't know if this is a place where I can put a little numbers to the game. So the reality is, like right now, if you go back to 2012 to the current time, the agriculture farm-based taxes has gone up 174%, and it's gone up 25% for urban housing. So, and we are urban housing also in rural because it's 1 acre plus a house. So again, council's trying to push, I'm not saying council directly, but council and staff are trying to raise it again right now. So MPAC is the one that's supposed to set these perimeters as a zero tax base. So if you kind of look at, we own, and I don't want to put it in that bad context and sounding, but we own more than 90% of the land in Chatham-Kent. And we're sitting here right now, to me, because industry tax has gone down, commercial tax has gone down. So we're looking at 150% spread between the rural, urban, and industry and commercial. How much of that dollars has come from agriculture to fit that zero balance? That's what they talk about. Everything comes back to zero. So we're subsidizing a huge amount of housing and industry, and I'm part of industry and commercial too. So I see a huge divide here, and there seems to be no place to go with it. We used to have committees with the municipality, and we just don't have a committee say on anything anymore.
Okay. Other comments? I wondered if anybody had any specific comments on any of the existing ward boundaries that are of a housekeeping nature. Like, are there any things that never made sense, or anything that doesn't make any sense anymore because of growth, or just anything that you want us to take a look at? Because, I mean, the quick summary is if it bothers you, it's likely to bother us too, so we're happy to take a look at it. And I don't know if there's anybody's got any thoughts about, Ward 1 or if there's a word you're interested in, we can just jump there. Can I ask, if we think about the boundaries between Ward 2 and Ward 6, how far towards the 401 these days is Chatham? Does anybody have any thoughts on like the functional reality of how far towards the 401 you can go, and when you're sort of actually still in the place that you think of as Chatham, even though you're not in the place that's a line on the map called Chatham? Any thoughts on that? Like, is it all Chatham to the 401 now, or is there still agriculture? Like, I know how it looks, I've driven it, but I'm just curious what you think from a point of view of people's attitudes.
When you look at the map that's represented there, you can see the little bit on Queen Street or Charing Cross Road that is yellow, that probably is residential, going to the southeast right there. So I hear talk of, well, that should be in Chatham. Then there's a little chunk on the northwest corner. No, I think there's one there too, but it's more, yeah, right there. And go up, there's a red part that really is part of Chatham. No, yeah, probably, but over on the west side, northwest. Just to the end of the M on the Chatham, right that area. But, yeah, so those are the two areas there that probably feel like they're in a rural riding, but really live in Chatham. But it's not up to the 401, so it's small areas. Sorry for not using this. It's not small if you're probably one of those residents, so it probably should be looked at. But in terms of overall size of Chatham, it's not a large part of Chatham.
Okay. Anybody from Wallaceburg? So I was going to ask the same question. So just generally, we've had one sort of out of the box idea of take the 401 or take the Grand River, but split it in two. Any other sort of out of the box things you'd want us to model? Just things that make sense when you stare at the map.
If you'd like out of the box, and listening to discussion here, if you took all the quote small town that had under the county system their own councils and representation, put them all into one ward, would the population be sufficient for, say, one council member, depending on numbers and that, but remove them and then make the rural areas consolidate the wards more so it's a common interest. We've heard tonight about rural areas that really have more urbanized centers that sometimes influence how votes go.
So the way I express that in terms of the principle of effective representation is do something that focuses on a combination of geography and community of interest, and be sensitive to the math and figure out a model that addresses the math, but that tries to aggregate it in a way that creates some authentic rural voices that are they don't accidentally get swamped by the urban communities that are adjacent to them. Is that a good way of capturing it? Any other interesting ideas? Like at this stage, they're all good ideas, and they don't pay us by the hour, so we'll run the numbers. So those are just comments from me. So, sorry, another question?
Yeah, so what's been discussed already is like how it's divided up number-wise. So like for Chatham itself, is that legal under the Constitution, the way it works, that they could have a larger number with less wards, like cut them down to 4 instead of 6 with a larger number?
Well, if you, you really couldn't take any representation away from Chatham right now because they're on the edge of underrepresented. But there's lots of different ways that you could either redraw the boundaries of Chatham and then redraw the numbers of council. But because they're only plus 24, it's not too badly out of whack. The thing that we're going to have to assess is how badly it will be by 2030. But you know, if you dropped another 5,000 people into Chatham over the next 10 years, we don't have to go 10. We only have to go 6. But you know, it would pretty clearly be outside of the normal boundaries that you'd be looking at. But I think then you'd want to take into account some of the other considerations, and like the authenticity of interest, as opposed to that's the point you were making earlier about when you take all the urban interests, does that potentially provide a mitigating factor?
I think you've hit on something that scares us in agriculture. All of us here representing agriculture. Like you just said that you really can't change the number of councillors in Chatham. So if we go to, let's say,
put it down.
Sorry?
You couldn't put it down because they're just barely adequate.
Yeah, so with that in mind, but if we're talking about going to the 2 or 3 pages before where it was highly concentrated as through the municipalities across that 11 and 13, so let's take 12. So let's say you pick 12 for Chatham-Kent, but you still kept 6 or more. If you start including those corners that really are part of the city, that increases the population. So that starts to lead to more than 24% at that point. As soon as you fix those little corners, then the one in the northeast is quite dense. The one in the south is not. But now that means if you go to 12, instead of having, let me think, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 councillors that have somewhat of a rural, at least they're in a rural area where they get elected from, or part of their area is. Well, if you take that now, we go down, we lose 3, and we go to 6 to get to 12. And now we're even more underrepresented by, not so much by population, but by our economic value, our needs. We have more drains, more roads, more bridges in Chatham-Kent than any other municipality in Ontario. The Louis could help in the numbers, but the miles of drains that we have, and they're, pardon?
4,400 kilometers.
Yeah, which is very large. So that scares all of us in agriculture with what you're talking about, because it's heavily towards population, and that's what scares us. Sorry, once again, a long way.
Thank you. So.
Just kind of expanding on that point too, I think that is the fear, like I mentioned before, of having less rural representation if you just go by, population. So the one cautionary tale I would suggest is that a lot of people at one point suggested making pie-shaped wards with a piece of Chatham in each ward. But there you go again. Most likely, you're going to end up with an urban councillor if you do that. So that would be my fear of please stay away from that. So if for some reason Chatham does get divided up, which maybe it's not fair to divide Chatham when you're not dividing other communities, I understand that too. But if it were, I would suggest that Chatham's boundaries, like the wards be divided with the boundary intact. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, don't make the pie shape where you have that urban rural mix, because then it'll be more lopsided when you start voting, I think.
Can I ask a different question? If the problem is that they're too aggregated right now, I wasn't there in the days of Peter Mayboom trying to come up with the original decision, but I want to guess that one of the things they were trying to do was not replicate all the old boundaries inside, but try to bring things together to create more of a sense of cohesion. But would it be attractive, like let's assume for a second that we were directed to stay at a council of 18, so the mayor plus 17. Would it make sense to disaggregate it into 17 individual wards? I think that's kind of what the gentleman in the second row was getting at. Smaller wards that are truer to who they represent. So like that would mean like 6 councillors in Chatham, each one with a smaller board, or you know, I suppose we could also keep the hybrid. We don't have to divide up Chatham, but would it make more sense to divide up the non-Chatham wards, instead of there being 2 councillors in a ward divided into 2, or instead of there being 3 divided into 3? Like, would that be better or worse? I see one comment at the back. So.
I think it would cause more divisiveness rather than cohesiveness that you're looking for. I have a comment. I guess I'm the only one here from the city.
No.
I get that sense from what the comments that are being made. And you're from the city, okay? And I guess I've always, since I've come to Chatham for over 45 years, always valued the fact that we have a rural urban, and I'm discouraged to hear some of the comments that our agriculturalists feel that they've got issues not being addressed. But I would like to put it to out there in the universe that perhaps it's not the municipal level that their issues can be addressed to. Perhaps we're really looking for them to get stuff done at the provincial level for the costs they have. Because farming, and please pardon me, you're the experts, but farming certainly has changed the last 40 years. And so with the large operations, perhaps it's funding and tax base and all that all comes incentives from the provincial and federal level. And I think we're going to the municipal level saying, I've got these issues, and I think, you know, or at the municipal level, the lobby's for you up there. But you do have unique issues that I'm hearing tonight. So I'm appreciating that, but I would like you all to know that, having lived in Chatham, I appreciate the agriculture. Most people living in the city do. But some of the comments here, my initial thing to you is, when I was here when they did that 1-tier amalgamation, and the poor gentleman passed away before he could actually do his report on whether it was a successful thing or not. And since then, there's been a couple of efforts to try to go back to the fact that it should really be 2-tier, because then you could have all the outlying, because I remember all those service centers and such, and it's good. I worked alongside a lot of people who had farms, and one of them would be working at the service center in town. So back and forth, there's not just in town and out town. It's, we are cohesive, or we're cohesive. So I do say there has to be a look at that for the 2-tier, because that's what I'm hearing here, is they want their special concerns brought perhaps to a different level.
So the question I was hoping we could focus on is, would it make sense to break it up more? We had one comment tending to the no, that would make it less cohesive. Any other comments on that?
Just try to make your money. I would support 100%, but the lady in the back row said I think they would make the issues more divided. Because if you started splitting the wards that we have now, you're going to again likely go back to the population effort, and you might have more of the Tilbury Wheatley type representation. You might have Dresden, Thamesville, Ridgetown, Blenheim, and we might not have any representation in the rural area. We still could get that under this plan, but that plan sounds worse to me.
My question's actually directed to Councillor Brock McGregor at the back.
He's just here as a visitor, so
Actually, he can answer this question better. At council, do a lot of the issues that are rural tend to get kicked into consent agenda, so they aren't discussed? And they're settled just, like, hey, this is something that needs to be done, so we don't need to discuss it. And the urban issues tend to be the ones that appear to get all the attention, when actually it's equally divided.
I've never really thought about it that way. I think that typically the consent agenda is things that are going to be unanimous. So like if it's a tender on a specific project that, is where we expect it, no one's going to pull it. It's going to go through, whether it's rural or urban. So I don't think there's maybe a differentiation there. Typically just the things that get pulled might be just more controversial in general, or might have more dissent on either side. So I don't think it leans more one way, rural or urban, with those, items of attention.
Thank you.
there was a question.
Permit me to make one more last pitch. My ideas of using the Thames River, and the fear is among a lot of people, okay, we have a council entirely made up of residents of the city of Chatham. That would only happen if the people in the outside areas just voted for those Chatham candidates. It would dilute the overwhelming influence of the city that we have right now. And it would make us more of a unified Chatham-Kent municipality. It would force the candidates to go out into the other areas to campaign. And we talked a little bit before, Chatham's underrepresented now, that point has been made. And they don't turn out for municipal elections as a rule, the residents, as much as we do. I mean, it's 30% overall. We turn out at a higher rate. So I wouldn't be afraid of Chatham running everything unless the rest of the Chatham-Kent went along with it and just voted for the Chatham candidates. Again, we need to get rid of the tribalism and the fiefdoms and the one area against another. And as far as, I mean, the people who have issues have to put their name forward and run for council. I've heard people say, well, it doesn't pay enough. I don't think I'd make it. I don't want to try. I don't want to take time away from my business. So when you have that kind of attitude in the population, you end up with what you end up with. I mean, if you want to make a difference, you've got to put your name forward and put your ideas forward and see if your fellow citizens will support it or not. So that's all for tonight.
Go ahead.
So just to add to what that lady said, I agree with her 100%. But the issue and the problem is that we used to have committees that we could work with staff and whatnot and put things forward. That's all gone. So there's no communication whatsoever. Things happen when they happen, and we find out later. And that's usually against what our thoughts would have been, but we have no say. So it used to be when you had the discussions, it didn't mean we were always going to win, but at least everything was on the table so that it could go to council and they could have a proper discussion. We don't have that now. It's gone. It needs to come back.
So the other comment at the back.
Okay. So you want ideas? Then have one at large for just the agricultural voice. The person has to be from the agricultural area. You've got many here that probably would run.
Yeah, I told you.
Just probably wanted to all sit in the front row.
That sounds good, but that's one vote. And that it's hard to get more than 9 votes if you're voting against an issue now. And that's what you need if it's a motion made that you're against, you need to have a tie in order to win it. And if it's a motion that the agriculture committee has put forward. So it really comes to the number of votes. The tie, the motion is defeated, and anything above a tie, so a 9 to 7 vote is the motion passes or so on. So one at large doesn't really, unless it was an addition to the ones we already have, would not help us. If it was an addition, then I could support them.
Well, just in the interest of making sure everybody's feeling comfortable participating, I don't want to get into a lot of heavy rebuttal. I'm the one who's asking for ideas, so I view it as a favor anytime somebody suggests one. We're going to take a look at the things that people suggest, and that's the spirit in which I'm really delighted everybody's been participating in. Any question?
I don't know if this is a question for here, but the mayor, most of us in a rural assume he votes for the city, but he's not a councillor. Is this a forum for maybe the mayor shouldn't be voting unless there's a tie? I don't know if that forum is for this, for today.
It doesn't really fit into this structure, but I'm happy to hear it.
We had a question, more of a statement online. It says, no, far too much us and them at council meetings. Been that way since amalgamation. Councillors need to have dual perspectives, and the ward adjustment is the only way to achieve this.
Thanks for the comment around that. And we got a question there.
That leads into my comment because I'm kind of backpedaling on what I said about the pie shape. I wonder what the people in this room feel about, do we want some urban representation in each ward? I can't tell if it's going to be a benefit or not, so that they understand the whole, everything about the municipality. I'm not sure what other places are set up like. I'm not sure how this group feels about it, but it's something to consider. Do we want that mix, or do we want to keep the rural urban, which it is now, it's divided now, basically. I'm not sure.
I'm happy to hear people's answers to that question.
I, at once upon a time, had thought that might be a good idea too, but then I've heard from other areas, and I think it was Hamilton that tried it, and because of population density, you ended up with representation only coming from the urban sector and not from the rural, because the person only had to campaign in the urban part of the pie to get enough votes to be elected. So I think that would be a detriment.
So, look, we've kind of got through the majority of what I wanted to cover. We'll take any other comments people have. And I'm happy to does anybody have any closing thoughts that they wanted to share now? Otherwise, I'll say it now because I don't want you to all head for the door. I know that the mayor and members of council and administration really appreciate the fact that you chose to give your evening tonight to come and comment on this. And there were 2 comments that I think are really important. One is about the importance of a functioning place where that there be appreciation of all the diversities of the community needs in the place. And I think that in a time of political polarization, it's really easy to forget how really it is one integrated place that everybody benefits from everybody else's success. And certainly the purpose of a system like this is to try and set up a structure that can achieve that and not accidentally disenfranchise anybody. I think everybody's made a lot of very good points on that. And the other thing that's really worth emphasizing in a time when so many people are opting out of the process is the comments were made about how important it is to stand and run and participate. Because what we need is the next generation of leaders in every generation, right? That's why it's always nice to see that kind of commitment to participation. And I would also say there's a lot of communities that would be envious of such a pleasant community meeting. So like, you're able to find places that have more difficult community meetings. So I just want to thank you all for participating tonight. So with that, are there any other comments?
In summary, if you get a straw poll, maybe it's 90% on rural here. So I think maybe there's a fear. So this, there was very few people that showed up last time. I don't know if they were rural or evenly split, but that's, pretty close probably tonight to 90% rural that are very, very concerned about our future. So just, that needs to be said in the notes. The rural was well represented tonight. That's all.
With very snappy shirts, I might add.
I am wondering, is there anything that's going to be built into the process so that this automatically kicks in, this review, after the 2030 election? Otherwise, will we run into a problem where council votes yes, maybe, no, like it gets to be a divisive issue for them? It's just something that automatically happens.
It's a good question. This council can't bind a future council, but I think the good news is through the Association of Clerks, they tend to be the guardians of the electoral process, and they're the ones who always bring forward, hey council, look, based on the latest population data, you're at risk of having a system that won't comply with the requirements if you don't do a review. There is a process whereby an elector can challenge the existing structure if on its face it appears to them that it isn't delivering effective representation. And the more subjective ones, did you take into account rural or urban and all that, are harder. But if the math is getting too weird, then you can bet all it takes is a certain number of electors signing a petition, and then there can be a judicial review of the process. So I think you can count on the process being driven forward. I mean, it's interesting that this one is proceeding, even though on its face you're not out of true right now. So but I appreciate the comment, and certainly we can make a recommendation that councils ensure that they take a look at it again in 2030. But my guess is the clerk would do it anyway. But appreciate the comment.
I just want to mention my comment again. My big concern is loss of representation. I would really appreciate if we are compared when we're looking at it to our county neighbors, even though we're not the same type of system, but our communities and our counties next to us have much more representation than we do. So I fear that we don't want to go back to having less representation than we do now. So we're never going to be in London or Windsor. I don't want to be. All urban centers. So we have to keep that in mind, that that's not a great comparable.
Yeah, for me to finish, it's still the same thing. I think the lack of communication is more of a divisive issue than what this whole map is. And we need to get back to that so that we understand each other's problems. The sad part is, from the rural side, we understand most of what's going on in the urban centers also. We need the urban centers. There's no question about that. If they're not here, we can't get our repairs done. We're also consumers. We need our food. We need all of those things too. And we need our kids to have a job if we can't support them on the farm. So, there's a whole lot of things here that seem to be in common, but yet there seems to be this line where there's no more communication with the municipality from that context. I think if we can get back to that, it's going to change a lot of things, to just understand each other.
Thank you.
Are these slides available on the website or anything?
And the survey. Please, if you haven't filled out the survey, best way for us to make sure that we get comprehensive answers from all of you. Because I know, like, many of you may have said, oh, I agree with that, but not bothered to put your hand up. That's great from the point of view of keeping the meeting moving along, but it's great if you can participate in the survey, so then we'll know, your answers to all of our questions, so we really appreciate that. Won't take any time, particularly now that you've heard the accompanying material that goes with it. And I just encourage anybody who's watching online to do the same. This broadcast will wind up being available. I'm not sure it'll make the best TV in the world, but for those who are really interested, it'll be available on YouTube as well. So, another question.
Yeah, count of how many are online listening to this?
I don't know.
18.
18. Yes. And we'll certainly hope to get answers of several hundred participants. Like I'd love to see a number up north of 800. Whether we'll get it or not, I don't know.
Will there be any type of way of figuring the urban compared to the rural?
Of who was participating?
Yes.
I doubt it. I think it'll probably come up a lot of, metadata that'll just say they were watching on Cogeco or whatever, but I don't think we'll know that.
But we will know from the survey.
Yeah.
Because they have to fill out which form as part of their response.
Sorry, I thought you meant about the online watchers.
No.
Yeah, no,
Just in general.
The survey.
The survey itself. And will there be communication in between as this moves along, or is this just going to be dead-ended?
So, this is the, once we get all the inputs in from the consultation process, then what we'll do is we'll be writing a report and delivering that to council, and we'll get some initial direction back and feedback from council, and then we're going to do this again, because the next time you see us, if you're kind enough to come out, is we'll actually report back on some of the different models that we've considered, as well as the future projections on population, so we'll all be able to see the 2030. We just didn't want to wait until we had that to get going on finding out what people think about today. And then we'll have to go back to council again, so there'll be quite a process through the phone.
Yeah. So there won't be any communication as it's going to council, so we can look at things, so we can have a discussion.
Yeah, that'll all be public, and we'll do more public meetings prior to the next time we go to the second time we go to council as well. So we're going to basically replicate the same, like the mirror image in the second phase.
Okay, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
We're looking forward to it. Like we really need your input throughout the process. So, like honestly, we can't do our job if you don't participate. So that's we're very sincere when we say thank you for coming.
How long is the survey up?
So
September 12th, unless we decide to leave it up a little longer. But the thing is, we've got to get our report done for the first visit to council. So, like honestly, we just leave it up perpetually. But at some point, we've got to take the data and turn it into a report. So.
I just know a lot of families are just not available at the end of August and the beginning of September.
the other thing I'll just say is that we also have a forum up, and the communications team can maybe speak more to it, but we'll have a forum up throughout the entire process on the Let's Talk Chatham website, where people can also leave comments there.
So, any other comments? Well, I understand that no facilitator has ever been shot for ending 7 minutes early. But we'll be hanging around for a few minutes in case anybody has any other comments. So thank you very much.
That's a good shot.
One more, sir.
I just wonder, do you know offhand, sorry, this is, how many councillors Chatham proper had before nomination? I can't remember.
Oh, I should know that.
Yeah, so
But I don't.
I just don't know if the numbers changed that much. That's why you get so many rural concerns. Because it changed a lot where we are. It maybe didn't change a lot for people that live in the city. I think that's the basis of a lot of the, divide.
Okay. Well, we need to wind up the meeting so that folks online can sign up. So I think we will bid you all a good night and thank you for your participation. And if anybody has any further comments and wants to chat, we'll be here. So thank you very much.